Exit number 1 reading.
Approved.
It had a very particular whoop-ah sort of noise. It vibrated in your chest, it vibrated the whole building. If they're gonna bomb me, we're gonna die, and that will be the end. It was just overwhelming fear. They were calling out my name and begging for morphine. Dr. Kathleen, please, please give us some morphine. And so I certainly considered, doing what they do in the movie, calling my loved ones and saying, I love you, and I'm, sorry.
When we run out, they target us and they shoot us. And when we return back, there was nothing, just there was bones and the beds.
I grieve with you for your loss and suffering, and humbly and respectfully ask for your forgiveness.
Medicine must not be a deadly occupation. Patients must not be attacked or slaughtered in their beds. Stop these attacks.
It's just all a big blur of horrendous grief at what had been done, and just an inability to understand or even try and think why this would have happened. My name is Kathleen Thomas. I'm an Australian-trained doctor who's currently working in intensive care as a trainee. And I've recently returned from Afghanistan with on my first mission with MSF. Kunduz is a province and a city in the north of Afghanistan. It was a stronghold for the Taliban for a long time. As the US has pulled back, the Taliban have begun to exert some more control in the area. When I arrived in Kunduz, my counterpart from whom I was taking over was at the airport with all of his luggage, and we had about a 5-minute handover on the tarmac where he was supposed to tell me everything about my job. Clearly, it was a very brief handover. The Kunduz Trauma Center, which we also refer to as KTC, was a very busy hospital. It was a 93-bed facility which had a busy emergency department where they saw over 100 patients per day. Every day we would see numerous patients come in with different horrific injuries. Traumatic amputations of legs, arms, big chunks of bodies taken out. And then on top of that, there would be lots of penetrating trauma, so gunshots to the chest, lots of head trauma. My job there was the supervisor of the intensive care unit and the emergency department. In the emergency department, there were 11 Afghani doctors, and in the ICU, there were 5 to 6 Afghani doctors. So my role was to supervise them clinically and also to teach them. MSF worked extremely hard, and they did ongoing discussions with all the local parties to ensure that everyone knew who we were, what we were, that we would treat everyone equally, and that within the walls of our hospital, it was a safe zone for either side of the conflict. On top of that, they have a very strict no weapons policy within the hospital, so that is clearly displayed outside. And every person or patient that enters the hospital is checked by security. I believe it was Sunday night, we noted that there was a lot of heavy artillery being fired, and that was coming probably from the Afghan military. And that was happening throughout the whole night. But about 2 o'clock in the morning is when all of us in the house were awoken by the sounds of warfare that we had never heard before. The Taliban, during the Eid holiday, had made their way disguised into the city themselves and were taking refuge in people's houses. When this attack to take over Kunduz happened, they kind of emerged from within the city as opposed to coming from outside the city. So they were able to quickly overwhelm the Afghan forces who were based in the city and force them to retreat, and I believe they retreated to the airport. But certainly within less than 24 hours, 12 hours maybe, the city was in the control of the Taliban.
Afghan security forces stretched to the limit as the Taliban seized control of most, if not all, of Kunduz, storming the town from 3 sides at dawn.
For the first time since the Taliban was overthrown in Afghanistan 14 years ago, the militant group has retaken a major centre.
The losses in Kunduz reflecting poorly on the NATO-trained government forces and embarrassing the Afghan president Ashraf Ghani. Both sides, they say, taking casualties.
We had over 130 patients arrive within a few hours on the first day, so we were completely overwhelmed. They were all over the emergency department, spilling into the hallways, and the ED doctors and the surgeons and the nursing staff were all just doing the best that they could to get through and prioritise the patients that needed help more urgently than others. The coordinator of the hospital at the time had interactions with the Taliban, who came and essentially announced that they had taken control of the city, that they were now in charge of the city, and wanted to just establish a relationship with us. From what I understand, they were quite respectful at the time. They acknowledged our rules and never disobeyed them. The day before the attack, that evening there was a lull, and that was the first time there had been a real big lull in the conflict. It just seemed like everything had sort of calmed down, and I noticed that there were even kids flying kites. Because it was calm, it was my first night that was calm, and I decided I needed to take that opportunity and get some sleep. I checked in with the emergency department, checked in with the intensive care department, and then came back to where we were sleeping, which was in the safe room. The safe room is a room that normally functions as a meeting room. I think it's made of some sort of reinforced concrete, so maybe 50 to 100 meters from the main building itself. Midnight was the last time I was outside, and I remember thinking, wow, it feels really calm. About 2 o'clock, we were very rudely awoken by an extremely loud sound. It was nothing like we had heard before, and I think at this point we had heard a lot of close bomb blasts and other explosions, but this was completely different. All I could hear from one of the nurses, and I could hear them absolute hysterical, just yelling through the phone, crying, sobbing, incomprehensible pretty much, but certainly screaming that there were injured patients.
took us around 10 minutes to understand that we were attacked by a plane. And as soon as it was clear, then I started to contact the NATO, because they were the first possible army that would have deployed warplanes. The initial response of NATO or US was a bit difficult to understand who I was talking with. Was surprised.
We opened the door, and that was the most memorable moment for me. Looking up and seeing this figure standing at the door, who was who was a nurse from the ER. I recognized him immediately. His left arm had been almost completely amputated and was just hanging by a small thread of tissue. He was covered in debris, which looked like dust. All of his clothes were in tatters. He had major injuries all over his arms. His face was bleeding, and there was a big piece of metal sticking out of his back. I think it lasted about an hour, from what I can remember, from about 2 to about 3. At some point, there was patients started arriving in the safe room. I think, yeah, the gunship must have left at this point. Most of them were being carried by other staff members, and as they all came through, it was just one after the other of staff that I knew, which was just extremely shocking. And within minutes, the whole room that we were in was totally full and overflowing, and there were patients lining up. I didn't want to keep dry retching like I had earlier. And now it was just about, okay, what's the next step? How do we get out of here? And what are we going to do with all these patients and these dead bodies? Suddenly we heard that there was an ambulance outside ready to take patients. So we began identifying who was the most urgent, who needed to be transferred immediately. We carried them outside and loaded them into the ambulance, who then drove them to the nearest hospital. It was daybreak, the sun was just starting to come up. That was the first time I left the building, was when I was helping to carry out some of the injured survivors. And at this point is when I saw the hospital itself. Sorry. Just a minute.
The United Nations says the bombing of a hospital in the Afghan city of Kunduz may constitute a war crime. The US president has offered his deepest condolences in what appears to have been an American airstrike.
My name is Dr. Smith. I'm general surgeon. And 5 years ago, I joined with MSF. We were busy on surgery. We hear sound of blasting. And we said, what happened? Then we hear another sound. And then the whole building, the glasses, the iron, everything was collapsed. It was continuous bombarding. One doctor, 2 nurses, 1 cleaner was died in front of us in this place. This department, this is our ICU. All 8 patients die. And when we returned back, there was nothing, just there was bones on the beds. No one was able to run out from the ICU, from the whole building, because when we run out, they target us and they shoot us. And some of our staff was in this room. We did primary first died, we had a small kit in this area. We used this kit, but it was not enough for a whole patient. It was very bad time. We cannot forget in each time. And that time, there was a patient. He was on the table, and he was under anesthesia. They were busy in this room. Then it was targeted by airplane. You can see the big hole in the wall. Then everything was fallen down on them. The patient was not able to go out because he was under anesthesia. After some while, he was dying on the table.
تغییرات بسیار آمده. همیشه برادرم خواهرم گریه میکنم. یک بهانه طلبی میکنم مقصد. برای ما مبلغ 4 لک افغانی برای ما کمک شد. جای پدرم خود چیز پره کرده نمیتونه. جای انسان هیچ وقت پیسه پره کرده نمیتونه. پدرم جای خودش داره.
Amid reports of up to 200 insurgents being killed, heavy fighting is said to be continuing on the outskirts of the city. A full victory would mark a huge relief for Afghan President Ashraf Ghani, who faced calls for his resignation over the loss of Kunduz.
10 to 15 terrorists were hiding in the hospital last night, and they came under attack. Well, they are killed. All of the terrorists were killed, but we also lost doctors. We will do everything to make sure that doctors are safe and they can do their jobs.
I mean, that was absolute bullshit. There was no fighters in the hospital. There was no one armed in the hospital. There was certainly no Taliban that were using it as some sort of base. So it was clear that that information was a blatant lie.
As commander, I wanted to come to Kunduz personally and stand before the families and the people of Kunduz to deeply apologize for the events which destroyed the hospital and caused the deaths of the hospital staff, the patients, and their family members.
The fact that the Afghan military and the US changed the story multiple times in the first few days really set off alarm bells for me and I think everyone involved. It's very difficult to then believe what they release when you've already got this, this background of a story that was changing and was completely inaccurate.
We had some peaks of tension because of the conflict. We were treating everybody, ex-combatant from the government, ex-combatant from the Taliban. So obviously, when we had to, for example, to cross the front lines, we had some moments of tension with ambulances that were stopped and searched.
یونیسف یک خوبیش همیست که تداوی عام ملت هم میکرد، به خصوص مردم های بیچاره و غریب و مجروحین چیز دستای جنگ که مردم های ملکی مجروح می شدن یا حادثات ترافیکی. طالبان را چیز میکنه، تداوی میکنه، این را ما نمیپذیریم. او چیز خودشان است، قانون دارن، یک پروگرام خودشان است. در او گپ ما کدام چیز نداریم. منتها زیادتر مجروحین دشمن در شفاخانه یونیسف چیز میشد، تداوی میشد و فعلا مرکز قوی از این در 14 جور شده. اونجا مجروحین جنگی طالبان را اونجا تداوی میکنن.
Today, U.S. Central Command is releasing the results of the investigation into the strike on the Doctors Without Borders Trauma Center in Kunduz City, Afghanistan. Importantly, the investigation concluded that the personnel involved did not know they were striking a medical facility. I want to emphasize that the trauma center was a protected facility and was on a no-strike list. Our forces did not receive fire from the trauma center during the incident, nor did the investigation find that insurgents were using it as a base for operations. Their ability to receive this information while in flight was lost when one of their satellite radios failed. The aircraft was fired on by a surface-to-air missile and subsequently moved several miles away from the city center.
1 reading 357, come from 2 reading 357 now. Check set number 1 reading. Every time we're checking the rotating bands, when we put it in 005 reach, we have to take it out. There's a nick or something in it, could get hung.
The intended target was an insurgent-controlled site, which was approximately 400 meters from the Doctors Without Borders Trauma Center. The aircrew mistakenly believed that the trauma center was the Taliban-controlled building.
It was a very, very clearly marked building, but it was also a building that was a unique structure in terms of the rest of the city. If it was a series of mistakes, this was a series of reckless decisions that were made on all levels, including at a very, very high level. And if that's the case, then to me that's gross negligence, and I believe that gross negligence could potentially constitute as a war crime.
The investigation concluded that certain personnel failed to comply with the rules of engagement and the law of armed conflict. However, the investigation did not conclude that these failures amounted to a war crime. The label war crimes is typically reserved for intentional acts, intentionally targeting civilians or intentionally targeting protected objects or locations. The investigation identified 16 U.S. service members whose conduct warranted consideration for appropriate administrative or disciplinary action, including a general officer. The actions included suspension and removal from command, letters of reprimand, formal counseling, and extensive retraining.
They have done an investigation. They have done an internal investigation, a military investigation. We wanted an impartial, independent investigation. We strongly believe that you cannot be the perpetrators as well as a judge and a jury. In Afghanistan, the Central African Republic, South Sudan, Sudan, Syria, Ukraine, and Yemen, hospitals are routinely bombed, raided, looted, or burned to the ground. Medical personnel are threatened. Patients are shot in their beds. You are charged with protecting peace and security. Yet, 4 of the 5 permanent members of this council have, to varying degrees, been associated with coalition responsible for attacks on health structure over the last year. These include the NATO-led coalition in Afghanistan, the Saudi-led coalition in Yemen, the Russia-backed Syrian-led coalition. You, therefore, must live up to your extraordinary responsibilities and set an example for all the states. I repeat, stop these attacks. The discussion here today cannot amount to empty rhetoric. This resolution cannot end up like so many others, including those passed on Syria over the past 5 years, routinely violated with impunity.
We haven't resumed our work in Kunduz, and we are not able to take that decision today because we're not able to get the guarantee that people will respect our medical facility. So we will not reopen until we are able to strike this deal with all the stakeholders in northern Afghanistan.
ډاکټران و لاړل ډاکټران و موږ ته ویل چې دلته دوا موږ ته نه رارسېږي او ځان هر خواته چې کاږي ویې کاږي که موږ سره راځئ هغه ته مزار ته
چقدر خدا رو خوارکای دیگه شمین دلش نمیشه شکم وقتا اینه کسی خورده است و میگرده دمیزان تو لاغر شدم تو قمرزی تیر کده بود لاغر نشده بود دمیزان روز که اشتکا میگرده هفته بود خواه ایگیران کده دا بغل بگی تا
One of the great frustrations I have now and MSF has is that we now have a situation where we're in Kunduz. There is no functional trauma center in all of northern Afghanistan. We know that patients now cannot access the care that they need. They're having to travel to Kabul in order to access the same care, and patients are most certainly dying because they cannot get to care quick enough.
ما دا خلی د کور کې دا اوس مې خلکو نه قرضدار مې 1 لک روپۍ خلکو را باندې دي خدای مې 2 بنګړي وو دا مې خرڅ کړل نو ټوټل د ما 2 لک او 10 روپۍ ولګېدلې پاکستان ته ورځم پورې زه مثلا سره لغاړې دغه قصبه‌کار یم سره لغاړې شیان خرڅوم او دا شفاخانه یوازینۍ ښه شفاخانه اوس د غریبو خلکو لپاره
They're still suffering a lot, and you know, I have the privilege of being able to come back to a country where it's safe and peaceful, and I have no major drama in my life, and these guys are left behind. They're stuck there. They can't leave. They can't get on a plane and be evacuated to safety. They have to deal with the ongoing consequences of this conflict.